The Galactic Military Academy's Advanced Weapons course had seen many species demonstrate their prowess over the centuries. The Kralliks, with their plasma projectors that could melt through starship hulls, the Zephyrians with their molecular disruptors that could tear apart matter at the atomic level, the Thornak with their gravitational pulse cannons that could crush a tank into a marble-sized sphere. But today, for the first time in the Academy's history, they had a human student. Marcus Chen sat in the back row of the amphitheater-style classroom, his presence drawing curious glances from the other cadets. At barely 6 feet tall, he looked insignificant compared to the towering Kralliks beside him or the armored bulk of the Thornak warriors. The delicate, crystalline Zephyrians regarded him with something approaching pity through their multifaceted eyes. Instructor Vex Tar, a grizzled veteran Kralliks with burn scars covering half his reptilian face, paced at the front of the classroom. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke, plasma rifles floating behind him in a gravitational field for demonstration purposes. Today, we examine practical weapons construction under battlefield conditions, Vex Tar announced, his translator converting his hissing speech into standard Galactic. You may find yourselves stranded on hostile worlds with limited resources. Your survival may depend on your ability to create effective weapons from whatever materials are available. The instructor's burning orange eyes swept across the assembled students. Each species will demonstrate their natural aptitude for improvised weapons creation. You have access only to standard classroom supplies. He gestured to tables laden with various academic materials common across the galaxy. Writing implements, data tablets, structural supports, binding materials, and basic tools. Cadet Zixla of the Kralliks, you may begin. A young Kralliks female rose from her seat, her scales gleaming purple in the artificial light. She approached the supply table with confidence, her forearms working in perfect coordination. Within minutes, she had assembled a crude but effective plasma torch using power cells from data tablets, focusing crystals from light fixtures, and conductive wire from various electronic devices. Impressive range and thermal output, Vex Tar noted as Zixla demonstrated on a test target. The plasma beam carved through the reinforced metal like it was soft cheese. Effective for both offensive and defensive applications. Next came Thornak warrior Grumbash, whose massive frame seemed too large for the classroom. He selected heavy structural components and binding materials, constructing what appeared to be an oversized club, but when he activated it, the weapon hummed with gravitational force that compressed the air around it. Devastating impact potential, the instructor observed as the gravitational club left a crater in the test wall, suitable for close-quarters combat against heavily armored opponents. The Zephyrian representative, a gossamer being named Silthara, created something far more subtle. Using various chemical compounds from cleaning supplies and laboratory materials, she synthesized a molecular acid contained within a crystalline delivery system. When demonstrated, it dissolved the target completely at the molecular level. Elegant and lethal, Vex Tar approved. Capable of bypassing most known defensive systems. Then all eyes turned to Marcus. The human stood slowly, feeling the weight of expectation from dozens of alien gazes. He had known this moment would come, eventually. Earth had only recently joined the Galactic Coalition, and humans were still proving themselves worthy of inclusion in elite institutions like the Military Academy. Marcus approached the supply tables, his mind racing. He could feel the other students watching him, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed skepticism. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as a relatively primitive species, having only achieved faster-than-light travel within the last century. Their weapons technology was considered crude by galactic standards. He examined the available materials carefully. Standard classroom supplies, just as the instructor had said. Writing instruments made of various materials. Data tablets with flexible screens, structural supports and connectors. Binding materials including elastic cords and adhesive strips, basic tools like cutters and shapers. The other students had all relied on their species' advanced understanding of energy manipulation, gravitational fields, or molecular chemistry. But humans had something different. They had a history of making do with less, of turning limitations into advantages. Marcus picked up a meter-long structural support rod, testing its flexibility. It bent under pressure but snapped back into shape when released. Perfect. He selected several more of different lengths and thicknesses. Next, he gathered elastic binding cords, the kind used to secure equipment during transport. He tested their tensile strength, finding them surprisingly robust. The adhesive strips would serve as reinforcement. His movements were methodical, almost meditative. He wasn't rushing to impress anyone. Instead, he seemed to be following some internal blueprint that only he could see. "What is the human constructing?" whispered Zixla to her companion. "I see no energy components, no molecular matrices." "Perhaps he lacks the knowledge to create proper weapons," suggested Grumbash in his rumbling bass voice. "Their species is still quite primitive." But Instructor Vextar watched with growing interest. He had studied human military history as part of his preparation for teaching their first cadet. What he had learned had been unexpected. Marcus was now binding the structural rods together, creating what appeared to be a curved frame. He used the elastic cords in a specific pattern, creating tension between 2 points of the frame. The construction was elegant in its simplicity, but its purpose remained unclear to most observers. "Is he building some sort of launcher?" Silthara's musical voice chimed with confusion. "But where are the projectiles? How will he generate sufficient force without energy manipulation?" The human continued his work, seemingly oblivious to the murmured discussions around him. He selected several straight, thin rods and carefully shaped their ends to sharp points using a basic cutting tool. Then he attached small stabilizing fins cut from data tablet screens. Recognition dawned on Instructor Vextar's scarred features. "Fascinating," he muttered in his native language. Marcus stood, holding his completed construction. It looked impossibly primitive compared to the advanced weapons created by his classmates. A curved frame with elastic cords stretched between 2 points. Simple pointed projectiles. No energy source. No advanced materials. No complex mechanisms. "Cadet Chen," Vextar called. "Please, demonstrate your weapon." Marcus nodded and approached the test area. The target was a standard combat dummy made of reinforced materials designed to withstand energy weapons and gravitational forces. Previous demonstrations had left it scarred but largely intact. The human raised his weapon, knocking one of his simple projectiles against the elastic cord. He drew the cord back, his muscles tensing under the strain. The curved frame bent slightly under the pressure, storing energy like a compressed spring. "Such minimal force generation," scoffed a Kralik student. "How can he expect to damage a military-grade target with such primitive means?" Marcus took careful aim, adjusting for distance and elevation in a way that suggested extensive training. His breathing slowed, becoming rhythmic and controlled. For a moment, the classroom fell silent. He released the cord. The projectile moved faster than most eyes could follow, crossing the distance to the target in a fraction of a second. But instead of the energy beam burn or gravitational crater left by previous demonstrations, there was only a soft thunk. The combat dummy stood unchanged for a moment. Then students began to notice the thin rod protruding from its torso, having penetrated completely through the reinforced materials and emerging from the back. "Impossible," breathed Zixla. "The penetration depth is greater than my plasma beam achieved." Marcus calmly knocked another projectile and fired again. This one struck the dummy's head section, passing cleanly through and embedding itself in the wall behind. A third shot pierced what would have been the heart region on most humanoid species. The classroom erupted in surprised chatter as students tried to understand what they had witnessed. The human's weapon appeared primitive, almost laughably simple. Yet it had achieved devastating results against a target designed to withstand far more advanced attacks. Instructor Vextar raised his arms for silence, his expression thoughtful. "Cadet Chen, please explain the principles behind your weapon." Marcus lowered his construction, which the other students were now eyeing with new respect. "This is called a bow, sir. It's based on the principle of stored kinetic energy. The elastic cord, when drawn and released, transfers its energy to the projectile, which we call an arrow. But the energy output appears minimal compared to plasma or gravitational manipulation, protested Grumbash. How does it achieve such penetration? It's about focusing that energy efficiently, Marcus explained. The arrow concentrates all the force into a very small point. Instead of dispersing energy across a wide area like a blast, it channels everything into precise penetration. Silthara's crystalline form seemed to shimmer with curiosity. But surely such a simple mechanism cannot match the sophistication of molecular disruption? Marcus smiled slightly. Different tools for different purposes. Your molecular acid can dissolve targets completely, but it takes time to work and can be neutralized by certain defenses. My arrows are mechanical projectiles. They're simple, reliable, and don't rely on any technology that can be jammed or disrupted. The instructor nodded slowly. And the construction materials? All standard classroom supplies, as requested. The frame is made from structural supports found in any temporary shelter. The string is standard elastic binding cord. The arrows are thin rods with shaped points and stabilization fins. Any soldier stranded on a hostile world could build this with salvaged materials. Vextar walked to the target dummy, examining the arrow holes. The penetration was clean and deep, with minimal collateral damage to surrounding areas. Precision targeting capability? With proper training, yes, sir. Humans have used bows for thousands of years in our history. We can achieve accuracy at ranges exceeding several hundred meters, with more specialized construction. 9. Thousands of years? Zixla's voice carried disbelief. Your species used such weapons for millennia? Along with other primitive weapons, yes. Before we developed gunpowder, then advanced energy weapons, projectile weapons were our primary military technology. Marcus paused. We never forgot the older methods, though. Sometimes simple solutions are the most effective. The classroom buzzed with new conversations as students began to reconsider their assumptions about human capabilities. The word primitive was being used less frequently, replaced by terms like practical and ingenious. Instructor Vextar studied the bow with professional interest. Rate of fire? Marcus demonstrated by rapidly knocking and releasing arrows in succession, in the space of time it would take to recycle a plasma weapon or recharge a gravitational projector. He had placed 5 arrows in a tight grouping on the target. Ammunition sustainability? Arrows can be recovered and reused unless damaged. They can also be manufactured in the field from available materials. No power source required. No complex components to fail. The instructor's scarred face showed what might have been approval. Operational reliability? Functions in any environment where the basic materials maintain their integrity, not affected by electromagnetic interference, gravitational anomalies, or most environmental hazards that would disable energy weapons. A thoughtful silence fell over the classroom. The demonstration had revealed something none of them had expected. The humans, considered among the galaxy's more primitive species, had approached the challenge from a completely different angle than their technologically superior classmates. Where others had tried to recreate miniature versions of their species' most advanced weapons, the human had gone backwards in technological complexity while advancing in practical effectiveness. Class dismissed, Vextar announced finally. Consider today's demonstrations carefully. Next session, we will discuss the philosophy of weapons selection in different scenarios. As students filed out, many cast curious glances at Marcus, who was carefully disassembling his bow and collecting his arrows. The Kralix student, who had dismissed his efforts earlier, approached hesitantly. Cadet Chen, she said, her translator struggling with what might have been embarrassment. I may have misjudged your methods. Could you perhaps explain more about these primitive human weapons? Marcus looked up from his equipment. I'd be happy to, though you might want to reconsider calling them primitive. Some of the most effective weapons in human history were incredibly simple in design, such as, well, there's the sling, which could kill at ranges exceeding bow effectiveness. The spear, which remained a primary military weapon for thousands of years, alongside more advanced technologies. The crossbow, which was so effective that some civilizations tried to ban its use in warfare. Zixla's 4 eyes widened. Banned? Why would anyone ban a weapon for being too effective? Marcus smiled as he shouldered his equipment. That's a conversation for another time. But I think you're starting to understand why humans might have something unique to contribute to galactic military science. As he walked toward the exit, Marcus could hear excited discussions breaking out behind him in multiple alien languages. The translator systems were working overtime as students shared theories and observations about what they had witnessed. Tomorrow's tactical theory class was going to be very interesting indeed. Word of Marcus Chen's bow demonstration spread through the Galactic Military Academy like wildfire through dry grass. By the next morning, corridors buzzed with animated discussions in dozens of languages as cadets debated the implications of what they had witnessed. Marcus entered the tactical theory classroom to find every seat filled, with additional students standing along the walls. Normally, Professor Kethara's advanced strategic thinking course attracted only the most dedicated military scholars. Today, it seemed half the academy had found reasons to attend. Professor Kethara herself was a legend at the academy. The elderly Zephyrian had served as a strategic advisor during 3 major galactic conflicts. Her crystalline mind, capable of processing thousands of variables simultaneously to predict battle outcomes with uncanny accuracy. Her tactical innovations had saved countless lives and ended wars that might have dragged on for decades. As Marcus took his usual seat, he noticed the changed atmosphere. Yesterday's polite indifference had been replaced by intense curiosity. Some students watched him openly, while others tried to observe him covertly while pretending to focus on their data tablets. I understand we had an interesting demonstration yesterday, Professor Kethara began, her musical voice carrying easily through the amplified chamber. Her form shimmered with colors that indicated amusement. Perhaps we should examine the tactical implications of improvised weapon systems. She gestured, and a holographic battlefield materialized in the center of the room. It showed a standard scenario. A squad of mixed-species soldiers stranded on a hostile planet after their transport was shot down. Enemy forces controlled the high ground and had superior firepower. Standard doctrine suggests several approaches to this situation. The professor continued. Establish defensive positions and await rescue. Attempt to salvage advanced weapons from the wreckage. Create improvised explosive devices to level the tactical playing field. The hologram shifted to show different tactical approaches, each color-coded for different species' preferred strategies. Krallick's approaches favored direct assault with maximum firepower. Thornak's strategies emphasized heavy defensive positions. Zephyrian tactics focused on stealth and precision strikes. However, Professor Kethara's form flickered with new patterns. Yesterday's demonstration suggests we may have overlooked certain possibilities. Cadet Chen, would you share your analysis of this scenario? Marcus stood, feeling dozens of alien eyes focusing on him. The holographic battlefield rotated slowly, revealing terrain features and enemy positions in detail. He studied it for several moments, his human brain processing information differently than his classmates. The enemy has superior technology and position, he began. But they're expecting us to respond with comparable technology. Standard tactics assume both sides are using similar weapon systems with roughly equivalent capabilities. Continue, the professor encouraged. But what if we don't play by those rules? Marcus gestured toward the hologram. They've positioned themselves to counter energy weapons and explosive devices. Their defensive screens are configured for high-energy attacks. Their armor is designed to disperse thermal and kinetic energy from advanced weapons. A Krallick student interjected, but surely any primitive weapons would be even less effective against such defenses. Marcus shook his head. Not necessarily. Their defenses are over-engineered for the threat they expect to face. Sometimes that creates vulnerabilities. Professor Kethara's form brightened with interest. Explain. Their energy shields are designed to stop plasma bolts and disruptor beams, which means they're probably configured to interfere with high-energy particles and electromagnetic fields. But a simple kinetic projectile might pass right through without triggering their defensive systems. The hologram shifted as Marcus gestured, highlighting the enemy positions. Their armor is built to disperse energy from explosive impacts across a wide surface area, but a narrow, focused kinetic impact might punch through by concentrating force on a single point. You're suggesting that primitive weapons might actually be more effective against advanced defenses? The question came from Silthara, who had attended yesterday's demonstration. I'm suggesting that unexpected approaches can be more effective than superior technology, Marcus corrected. The enemy is prepared for certain types of attacks. They might not be prepared for attacks they consider obsolete. Professor Kethara began manipulating the holographic display, adding new elements to the scenario. Assuming you could construct improvised kinetic weapons, how would you apply them tactically? Marcus studied the new parameters, his mind shifting into a different mode of thinking. His human ancestors had faced similar situations countless times throughout history, using inferior weapons against technologically superior enemies and finding ways to win through cunning rather than firepower. Stealth deployment would be crucial, he said. No energy signatures to detect. No electromagnetic emissions to track. A bow doesn't show up on most sensor sweeps because it's essentially a mechanical device. He pointed to features on the holographic terrain. Use natural cover for concealment. Engage from maximum range to avoid detection. Target key personnel, rather than trying to destroy equipment. Disable communications, command personnel, sensor operators. But surely the limited range of such weapons would be a significant disadvantage. This from Grumbash, the Thornak warrior who had demonstrated the gravitational club. Not as limited as you might think, Marcus replied. With proper construction and training, effective range can exceed several hundred meters. At night, or in low visibility, that's often sufficient to engage undetected. The professor's form rippled with new patterns as she processed this information. Interesting. And ammunition sustainability? That's one of the biggest advantages, Marcus explained enthusiastically. Energy weapons need power cells. Gravitational devices need graviton generators. Molecular disruptors need exotic matter, but arrows can be made from almost any straight, sturdy material. Recovered from targets and reused. Manufactured in the field from salvaged materials. A new voice spoke up from the back of the room. But what about rate of fire? Surely advanced weapons have a significant advantage in sustained combat? Marcus considered this carefully. Depends on the situation. Yes. Most energy weapons can fire more rapidly than a bow. But they also have limitations. Power cell life. Heat buildup. Cycling delays for high-energy weapons. A bow can maintain steady fire as long as the archer has arrows and strength. And in close combat? Pressed another student. A bow isn't ideal for close quarters, Marcus admitted. But that's why humans developed multiple weapon systems. Spears for medium range, swords for close combat, daggers for last resort, each tool for its optimal situation. Professor Kethara began modifying the holographic scenario again. Let's explore this concept further. Assume your squad has access to materials for improvised weapons construction. Design a comprehensive tactical approach using these principles. Marcus looked at the display, seeing it not as a static problem but as a dynamic situation where human adaptability could provide unexpected advantages. First priority is intelligence gathering. We need to understand their capabilities, patrol patterns, communication protocols. The hologram shifted as he spoke, showing potential reconnaissance approaches. Small teams with minimal signatures, using improvised weapons that don't register on sensors. Observe and report without engaging. Once we understand their patterns, we target their weaknesses. Communications first. Disable their ability to coordinate. Then, sensors. Blind their detection capabilities. Finally, command structure. Remove their ability to respond effectively. Professor Kethara's form brightened with approval. And if they adapt to counter your tactics, then we adapt faster. Marcus replied with confidence. That's what humans do best. We're not the strongest species, or the fastest, or the most technologically advanced, but we're very good at changing our approach when something isn't working. A thoughtful silence fell over the classroom, As students considered this perspective, many had been trained to think of warfare in terms of technological superiority, where victory went to whoever could deploy the most advanced weapons most effectively. Cadet Ziexla, the professor called, addressing the Kralik student who had been so skeptical the day before. Your analysis? The young Kralik stood, her forearms gesturing as she organized her thoughts. I find myself reconsidering many assumptions, Professor. We focus so heavily on advancing our weapons technology that we may have forgotten to consider how that technology can be countered. Elaborate. Our plasma weapons are incredibly powerful, but they require specific power sources and materials. If an enemy could disrupt our supply lines or damage our equipment, we might find ourselves unable to fight effectively. But if they were using simpler weapons that could be manufactured from available materials, they could maintain combat effectiveness under conditions that would neutralize our technological advantages, finished Professor Kethara. Excellent observation, another student spoke up. But surely, this is only effective against technologically advanced enemies who have become dependent on complex systems. Against other primitive forces, advanced weapons would still be superior. Marcus shook his head. Not necessarily. There's something to be said for reliability and simplicity in any combat situation. Complex systems fail. Simple systems keep working. He gestured toward the holographic display. During human history, there were many instances where technologically superior forces were defeated by enemies using simpler, more reliable weapons. Sometimes the sophisticated solution isn't the best solution. Professor Kethara began projecting historical data. Let's examine some examples. The human military archives contain numerous case studies of technological superiority being overcome through tactical innovation. The hologram shifted to show historical battle scenes from Earth's past. Medieval knights in advanced armor being defeated by peasants with crossbows. Sophisticated aircraft being brought down by simple surface-to-air missiles. High-tech modern armies struggling against guerrilla fighters using improvised weapons. Notice the pattern, the professor pointed out. In each case, the technologically inferior force succeeded not by matching their enemy's capabilities, but by avoiding direct confrontation and exploiting unexpected vulnerabilities. Grumbash rumbled thoughtfully. This suggests that military education should include training with primitive weapon systems, not just advanced technology. An intriguing proposal, Professor Kethara agreed. Cadet Chen, do humans still train with these historical weapons? Marcus nodded. Many do. Yes. Archery is still a popular sport and hunting technique. Martial arts schools teach sword and spear techniques. Military units sometimes train with primitive weapons for survival situations. And this training provides advantages beyond simple weapon proficiency? Absolutely, Marcus replied enthusiastically. It teaches you to think differently about combat. To rely on skill and tactics rather than technology. To make do with limited resources. To understand the fundamental principles behind all weapons, not just the specific operation of current technology. The professor's form flickered with new patterns that suggested deep consideration. Class, I want you to consider an assignment. Choose a primitive weapon system from any species' historical development. Research its tactical applications, advantages, and limitations. Then propose how it might be integrated into modern military doctrine. Students began pulling out data tablets, already discussing potential topics among themselves. The conversation level rose as excitement built around this unexpected academic direction. Cadet Chen, Professor Kethara called as the class began to disperse. A moment, please. Marcus approached the professor's position at the front of the room. Up close, her crystalline form was even more impressive, refracting light in complex patterns that somehow conveyed emotion and thought. Your demonstration yesterday has sparked considerable discussion among the faculty, she said. We're beginning to wonder if our curriculum may be missing important perspectives. I don't think it's missing perspectives, Professor, Marcus replied carefully. I think it's very good at what it's designed to do. But maybe there's room for additional approaches. The Academy Council is considering establishing a new course track: historical military applications and tactical innovation. The idea would be to study how pre-technological warfare principles might apply to modern conflicts. Marcus felt a surge of excitement. That sounds fascinating, Professor. We'd need an instructor with expertise in primitive weapons systems and historical tactics. Someone who understands both the technologies and the strategic thinking behind their use. Her form shimmered with what might have been amusement. Know anyone who might qualify? Marcus stared at her, hardly believing what she seemed to be suggesting. You want me to teach? You're still a cadet, she clarified. But perhaps as an assistant instructor, sharing practical knowledge while continuing your own studies, it would be unprecedented. But then, this entire situation is unprecedented. I would be honored, Professor. Think about it, she said. Discuss it with your advisor. If you're interested, we could start with some informal seminars. See how students respond to the material. As Marcus left the classroom, his mind raced with possibilities. When he had entered the academy, he had expected to struggle to prove that humans belonged among the galactic elite. Instead, he might have found a way to contribute something unique that no other species could offer. Behind him, conversations continued as students debated the implications of primitive warfare in a technological galaxy. The word primitive was evolving in their vocabulary, shifting from meaning inferior to meaning fundamental or essential. Tomorrow's weapons demonstration lab was going to be very different from anything the Academy had seen before. 3 months later, the Advanced Tactical Innovation Laboratory at the Galactic Military Academy had become the most popular elective course in the institution's history. What had started as informal seminars led by Marcus Chen had evolved into a full curriculum that challenged everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. Today marked a special milestone. The first joint exercise between traditional Academy forces and the new Primitive Warfare Integration Unit. Admiral Thextor, the Academy's commanding officer, had arrived to observe personally, along with representatives from every major galactic military force. The exercise scenario was complex. A hostage rescue mission on a heavily defended space station. The traditional team would use standard galactic military equipment and tactics. Marcus's team would rely on improvised weapons and unconventional approaches. Both teams had the same objective, but radically different methods to achieve it. Commander Vextar, now serving as an observer rather than instructor, stood beside Admiral Thextor on the observation deck overlooking the training facility. The massive Kralix Admiral's scarred hide bore witness to decades of combat experience across 3 galactic wars. Are you certain about this, Commander? Admiral Thextor's voice carried the weight of authority earned through countless battles. Allowing cadets to face advanced defensive systems with primitive weapons seems unwise. Vextar's 4 eyes focused on the holographic displays, showing both teams preparing for insertion. 3 months ago, I would have agreed completely, sir. Now, I'm not so certain our assumptions about primitive warfare are correct. On the displays, the traditional team was conducting final equipment checks on their advanced gear: plasma rifles, gravitational disruptors, quantum communication arrays, personal force fields, stealth generators, and molecular scanners. Every piece of technology represented centuries of galactic military development. In contrast, Marcus's team appeared almost comically under-equipped. Their weapons looked like artifacts from a historical museum. Bows, crossbows, spears, swords, and various mechanical devices that seemed impossibly simple compared to their high-tech opponents. But Admiral Thextor noticed something interesting in their preparations. Where the traditional team focused on equipment testing, Marcus's team was engaged in detailed planning sessions, studying terrain maps, discussing timing, and practicing coordinated movements that looked almost like a complex dance. Team 1, you are cleared for insertion, announced the exercise controller. Mission parameters: rescue 12 hostages from level 7 of the station. Neutralize all hostile forces. Avoid civilian casualties. Time limit: 1 hour. The traditional team moved out with military precision, their advanced sensors immediately beginning to map the station's interior. Their force fields activated, providing protection against energy weapons. Their stealth generators made them nearly invisible to most detection methods. Team 2, you are cleared for insertion, the controller continued. Same parameters. Marcus's team moved very differently. Instead of advancing directly toward their objective, they seemed to scatter, taking separate routes through the station. Their movements were careful and deliberate, using natural cover and avoiding areas where their opponents might have placed sensors. Interesting approach, Admiral Thextor observed. They're not trying to match the enemy's capabilities. Recents, Stefrenharf. No, sir, Vextar agreed. They're doing something else entirely. There, on the primary display, Team 1 was making excellent progress. Their advanced sensors had mapped the station's layout completely, identified all hostile positions, and located the hostages. They were systematically neutralizing enemies with overwhelming firepower, their tactics textbook perfect for a technologically superior force. Team 2 remained largely invisible on the sensors, their movements appearing random and disconnected. Several observers began to mutter about the futility of primitive weapons against modern defenses. Then something unexpected happened. "Sir," called the exercise controller. Confusion evident in his voice. Team 2 has somehow disabled the station's primary communications array. I'm no longer receiving updates from the defending forces. Admiral Thextor leaned forward, studying the displays intently. How is that possible? The communications array is heavily shielded and protected by multiple defense systems. On a secondary screen, they could see the answer. One member of Marcus's team had reached the communications center through maintenance shafts too narrow for larger species to navigate. Instead of trying to overcome the electronic defenses with sophisticated countermeasures, he had simply used a mechanical crossbow to punch metal arrows through critical components. No electronic signature to detect. Vextar murmured, with something approaching admiration. No energy discharge to trigger defensive systems. Just kinetic force applied precisely where it would cause maximum damage. Team 1 suddenly found themselves operating in a communications blackout, unable to coordinate with each other or receive updates on enemy positions. Their technological advantages began to work against them, as their sophisticated equipment demanded constant data sharing and coordination. Team 2 has disabled the station's sensor network, the controller reported, his voice now carrying notes of disbelief. Defensive systems are operating in manual mode only. The display showed another team member in a different maintenance area, methodically destroying sensor arrays with what appeared to be a simple spear. Again, no electronic countermeasures, no sophisticated hacking attempts, just precise physical destruction of critical components. This is remarkable, Admiral Thextor said quietly. They're not fighting the defenses, they're ignoring them entirely. Team 1 pressed forward, still confident in their superior firepower, but they were now operating blind. Their force fields and energy weapons functioned perfectly, but they had lost the information advantage that made their technology truly effective. Meanwhile, Team 2 had begun the actual hostage rescue. Instead of fighting their way through defended corridors, they had found alternative routes through service areas and maintenance passages. Their smaller size and lower technology signature allowed them to move undetected through areas the defenders hadn't bothered to guard heavily. Hostage location secured, came the report. Team 2 has reached the prisoners without triggering defensive responses. On the screen, they could see Marcus's team carefully cutting through restraints with simple metal tools, moving the hostages through the same maintenance routes they had used for insertion. No energy signatures to track, no electronic communications to intercept. Team 1, meanwhile, had reached the original hostage location, only to find it empty, their sensors unable to track where the prisoners had been moved, because the tracking systems had been physically destroyed rather than electronically compromised. "This is impossible," muttered one of the observing officers. "How are they moving 12 people through a defended station without being detected?" The answer became clear as the exercise continued. Team 2 wasn't just using primitive weapons. They were employing primitive tactics, small groups, independent operation, minimal electronic signature, maximum adaptability. They treated the station not as a technological environment to be overcome with superior technology, but as terrain to be navigated using stealth and cunning. Team 2 reports successful hostage extraction, the controller announced. All prisoners secured. Minimal force used. 0 casualties. Team 1 was still fighting their way through defending forces, their superior weapons devastating but their coordination hampered by the communications blackout. They were winning every individual engagement but losing the overall mission because they couldn't adapt to the changed tactical environment. Admiral Thextor turned to Vextar with an expression of profound thoughtfulness. "Commander, I believe we need to reconsider some of our basic assumptions about modern warfare." "Yes, sir," Vextar agreed. "It appears that technological superiority may not be as absolute an advantage as we believed." The exercise concluded with both teams successfully completing their missions, but the methods and timeframes were strikingly different. Team 1 had achieved victory through superior firepower and advanced technology. Team 2 had achieved victory through superior tactics and adaptability. In the debriefing session, representatives from various galactic military forces listened intently as Marcus explained the principles behind his team's success. "We didn't try to match their capabilities," he said. "We tried to make their capabilities irrelevant. Every sophisticated system has critical components that can be damaged through simple physical force. Every high-tech solution depends on infrastructure that can be disrupted through low-tech methods." Admiral Thextor stood, his massive frame commanding attention from everyone in the room. "Cadet Chen, your methods have challenged fundamental assumptions about military doctrine that have remained unchanged for centuries. I believe you may have identified critical vulnerabilities in our current strategic thinking." "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied. "But I want to be clear about something important. This isn't about replacing advanced technology with primitive weapons. It's about understanding that different situations require different solutions, and sometimes the